Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so glad to be here with all of you. Sorry about the short delay, but we always get started on here. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer to set up than we intend, but I'm here now and so glad to be here with all of you. And it should be a great stream tonight. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Yeah, should be a good stream. Just trying to do the best we can do here and get everything going and do the best that we can do, because that's what we want to do. That's what we want to do. So yeah, I guess we'll just get going here and talk about what we need to talk about.
I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
All right, everybody. All righty. All righty, everybody. Wild night. Lot going on, as you can see. Yesterday I went on two big shows. But before I get to that, I mean, I didn't go on big shows to talk about good things, but anyhow, as far as the way we do this, the way we do our streams here is that we do the opening remarks, which is me just talking about what it is I want to talk about for the evening. And then from there, we do a roll call where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. We find out who it is on the other side of the camera. And then after that, I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the night. So if there's something you want me to talk about in the second half of the program tonight, by all means, shoot me a super chat. I will be writing the super chats down during the first half of our show. And then I will keep writing them down as we go along, and I'll just keep answering super chats once we get to the second half of the program tonight. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. I see we've got our first super chat just came in. I'm all writing it down. Huey Newton. And I'm writing it down. And so I'll be writing them down as we go. And so I'll just roll into my opening remarks, which I had kind of a historical topic I was going to talk about, but there's a lot going on in the world. So I'll talk about that historical topic just so we have clarity on that. But I'll also tell you what's going on. So as you heard on Monday, or I believe it was on Tuesday, they indicted the four leaders of the Uhuru movement. Well, one of them is Ghazi from Black Hammer, and the other three are Jesse Neville, Penny, and Chairman O'Malley from the Uhuru movement. They've all been indicted for conspiring to have American citizens act as Russian agents. Big news. Big news. So that happened. I was obviously not thrilled about that. I streamed about that. That was my last stream. I talked about that. And then yesterday I appeared on Kim Iverson's show to talk about it. And Kim Iverson and I had a great exchange about that, about what a big attack it was on freedom of speech. And then before that, I actually went on the Convo couch and we had a debate about, true capitalism. Has true capitalism ever existed, or has true communism, full communism ever existed? And it was quite an exchange. Okay. These are all good super chats. Already going to be a lively half the show, but keep them rolling in. The second half of the show is going to be lively. So I went on the Convo couch, and I went on Kim Iverson's show. And basically, I'm figuring out how we can do everything possible as the Center for Political Innovation to support the Uhuru movement. So today, I did some work for my job at RT, made some business phone calls, talked to a few people, a lot of great things are happening. Peter Coffin is making this great documentary, and my book is continuing to sell. Well, I mean, this book I wrote is, a lot of people are really shaken up by it. I'll just tell you that much. This book is getting a lot of attention. There's somebody who's a member of Party of Communists who I understand they read this book. They were blown away by it. They bought like 3 copies for other members. And, a lot is happening with this book. And every day I get on there and more of them have sold. I mean, this book is really making an impact. But anyway, so some business phone calls, and then I went to the gym and I exercised, right? I started out with my arms in the air thing, got to 14 minutes and 53 seconds today. Didn't do that last time where I did 20 in the air. That was phenomenal, but I didn't get there this time. But anyway, so then as I'm coming home from the gym, I'm checking social media and find out what's the latest. Folks, Glenn Greenwald, Glenn Greenwald, the journalist, Glenn Greenwald, he was key in helping Julian Assange and WikiLeaks revelations, Edward Snowden's revelations. He quit The Intercept because they were basically trying to get him to run partisan anti-Trump propaganda. And yeah, he's a progressive and anti-imperialist. He's a critic of the Western global order. He's one of the biggest critics of Russiagate. And so then I see that Glenn Greenwald says that he went on 2 different shows today. Apparently, he went on Tucker Carlson tonight, the Fox show, to talk about the indictment against the Uhuru movement on Fox News. And Glenn Greenwald went on Glenn Beck's show. Glenn Beck, remember Glenn Beck, the right-wing conservative, the Mormon who used to be the big Fox News guy? Well, he went on Glenn Beck's show, and Glenn Beck is also supporting the Uhuru movement. And it's interesting because my interview that I did with Kim Iverson, it ended with Kim Iverson saying, I wonder how many people on the right, how many conservatives will support the Uhuru movement. And I said, well, they should support the Uhuru movement. Because the reason they're being targeted is because they're not Democrats, because they run in local elections against the Democratic Party. They urge black people to break with the Democratic Party, and they humiliated Obama on national television back in 2008 and showed that not all black activists were supporting him. However, I figured, they are black activists, they are socialists, and these people, Fox News, everything evil is socialism. And, they think racism isn't real. It's just something made up to hurt white people or something like that. So I figured there wouldn't be much interest, but apparently Tucker Carlson did a whole segment where Glenn Greenwald defended the Uhuru movement. And Glenn Greenwald also went on the Glenn Beck program and defended the Uhuru movement. And you know, the same night that I was on Kim Iverson's show, Max Blumenthal was on Jimmy Dore's show. And, you know, great minds think alike. Max Blumenthal and I made the same point about how this is the Democrats trying to go after their rivals and trying to punish a third party that ran against them. Yeah, this is wild, folks. People, I got to tell you, the thesis that I've been running with for a while, and the thesis that really kind of defines this book, is that the left, the so-called left, is not the left. The synthetic left is not the left. But what we're seeing with MAGA, as weird as it is, as politically confused as it is the beginning of a process that could lead to a real left emerging, right? That MAGA, it's a lot of low-income people who are angry. They're angry at the big banks and corporations that run the world. They are not supporting the wars. They're angry at the police state, at the FBI and the Pentagon, etc. And that they are demanding leadership in Washington that make their life better. And in this book, I talk about how there is the basis for an anti-monopoly coalition to be formed because the lower level capitalists who support Trump have a common interest with China and Russia. They believe in economic growth against the big monopolies that are pushing for degrowth and Malthusianism. And I'm not saying Trump is a communist or a socialist, because he's not. And I'm not even saying that the MAGA movement as it currently exists is anything progressive, because it's not. What I'm saying is that there's a process taking place. And what I wrote in this book about how what's starting now with Trump is the beginning of a process that could lead to a real socialist movement emerging at some point, as we see the basis for an anti-monopoly coalition, as we see economic suffering and divisions in the ruling class. Basically, my thesis in this book is coming more true every day. And the basis of an anti-monopoly coalition is emerging. And the fact that Fox is now giving platforms to people that are sympathetic to the Uhuru movement, to black revolutionaries who are being charged with being Russian agents, this is big. This is very, very big. And this is a process. And again, go and read this book. Go and read this book. Because the people who've read this book, go and read the reviews on Amazon. I mean, and the link is down below. Go and read this book, because in this book, I make a case based on years of research about the problem of overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profits, about Bonapartism and divisions in the ruling class, about fascism and the nature of fascism, about the nature of revolutionary organizations, about the divisions in the American elite and what's happening. And I make an argument in this book that many people find to be very convincing and really gets to the essence of what is going on in the country. And so I urge you to just go and read this book. Go and read this book. That's my advice. And yeah, I mean, I'm kind of blown away. I'm really happy that Glenn Greenwald is doing this, but it's not enough. We need to scream from the heavens in defense of the Uhuru movement. Last night, I sent them a big donation, and I hope other people will do the same thing. Because if they can come for if they can come for them, they can come for us, they can come for anybody. I mean, if they say that sowing discord is a crime, they say spreading Russian propaganda, i.e. challenging the prevailing narrative in the United States about foreign policy, is a crime, they can come for any of us. And they did throw the national leadership of the Communist Party USA in prison back in 1948 on the grounds that they advocated the violent overthrow of the U.S. government, and they proved in court that they did not advocate the violent overthrow of the U.S. government, but the law said, or teaching any ideology that might lead people to that conclusion. And so on the basis not of anything that Gus Hall ever did, not on anything that William L. Patterson ever did, not on anything that Benjamin Davis ever did. The National Board of the Communist Party was thrown in prison for things that Marx wrote before they were born, and that Lenin wrote decades prior. It was horrible. They can do this. They can do this, right? They can do repression if we let them get away with it. Now, I know Garland Nixon is, he's a great radio host and all of that. And I believe he at one point he was on the national board of the American Civil Liberties Union. He might still be on it. I don't know. But we absolutely need every entity right now to speak up in support of the Uhuru movement, to condemn the way that they are being charged. That is what we need. So yeah, I just got to get that out of my system. And I'm really empowered, I'm just I'm feeling empowered, but I'm also saying you never quit while you're ahead. And this could be a long thing. It may be that they just want to keep them tied up in court for years, right? It may be that they try to just prolong this trial as long as possible. They take every pamphlet and every leaflet Uhuru's ever published and read it to the jury just to make them spend all their money and spend the rest of their lives in court. Who knows? Who knows? Garland resigned from the ACLU. Okay. But regardless, we need to do everything we can do to raise awareness about their case. And while I'm really happy about Glenn Greenwald, really happy about Tucker Carlson, really happy about Glenn Beck. Now, those are words I would never expect myself to say, but there you go. And while I'm really happy about Jimmy Dore and Max Blumenthal, I got to tell you, I have never been so disgusted with the internet communist left. Oh my God. I have never been so disgusted with them. A group of black revolutionaries, black socialists, black Marxists, students of Lenin, had their homes raided and are now indicted as foreign agents by the American government. And the prevailing view on social media among people who call themselves communists is they're cringe. It's okay because they're cringe. Oh, I saw this video about how one of them doesn't support trans, and I heard that they're like a cult because I've never seen anything like it. All it takes to get these left book losers to turn on somebody is you make a video where you make fun of them or tell a lie about them, or you play a video of them saying something completely defensible, and then you stop it and saying, what they mean is, that's all it takes. The internet left, the Communist Party USA, the PSL, Party of Socialism and Liberation, the endless amount of accounts with anime emojis and people wearing Che Guevara costumes, they are worthless. And there's a reason I've been beating the drum, out of the movement to the masses, out of the movement to the masses. These people are garbage. They are absolute garbage. That Danky Kang, who I made a video response to, right? He actually, on his video, I kept saying in my video, why won't he speak up in support of the Uhuru movement? I showed how we have been supporting the Uhuru movement the whole time. And in his video, he kept saying, okay, fine, I'm against police brutality. And he wouldn't say he supported the Uhuru movement. I mean, he was so scared of being canceled. When I'm baiting him for not defending the Uhuru movement, he can't even bring himself to support the Uhuru movement. These people are worthless. Maoist Rebel News and Vosh and all of them. They are completely worthless. If you won't speak up for the Uhuru movement, there's no way in hell you can call yourself a revolutionary at this point. If you can't speak up for the Uhuru movement, you are not a socialist, you are not a communist, you are not an anti-imperialist, you're just worthless. And that is what the overwhelming majority of so-called communists on Twitter are. They are worthless. If you see the American government arresting black socialists and calling them Russian agents, and your response is, "Ooh, I might get canceled because I heard," then you're not worthy of the name. And we're seeing that. I mean, the fact they celebrated the murder of Dari Dugina, that was horrifying. The fact that they're all on the wrong side in Ukraine, but this takes the cake. This absolutely takes the cake. It absolutely takes the cake. And, I mean, the one thing that's worth pointing out, and this must be pointed out, is all the people who hate me are also supporting the American government in throwing a group of black revolutionaries in prison. And in fact, some of the very people who have gone out of their way to smear me and besmirch my reputation have been running interference for the FBI's planned indictment against the Uhuru movement for a long time. And I think you all know who I'm talking about. So at this point, we all know what's going on. We all know who's on what side. We caught Vosh running interference for it. We caught other people running interference for it. And we know who's on the right side and who isn't. And we also know that what I've predicted in my book, about the basis of the anti-monopoly coalition is becoming more and more true every day. And so I just want to leave it at that for that. But, keep the super chats going. What I originally intended to talk about for my opening remarks tonight, I was going to talk in my opening remarks about the Third International, the Communist International, the Comintern, because people don't know this history, but it keeps coming up. And so I'm just going to quickly, shorter than I'd intended to, but you never know, right? There's a lot to say there. The Third International, the Communist International. What was it? What did it do? I'm just going to quickly go over this history. All right, so quickly. Karl Marx, when he was alive, his slogan was, "Workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains." And he sought to build a multinational, international working class movement. And so he formed the first international, which was the International Working Men's Association, the IWA. And Marx was in it, and Mikhail Bakunin, the anarchist, was in it, and Ferdinand Lassalle and some other people were in it. And it collapsed due to fighting between Marxists and anarchists. The anarchists were promoting violence and chaos, terrorist methods, and Marx was promoting the building of labor unions, political struggle, the formation of working class political parties that would take part in elections, etc. They couldn't see eye to eye and eventually collapsed. Around the time that Marx was dying, you saw the very beginning of what was called the Second International. Marx wrote Critique of the Goethe Program. Well, the Goethe Program was the founding program of the German Social Democratic Party. And the German Social Democratic Party eventually grew to be a very big party. And there soon was parties like it in Austria and parties like it in Britain and France. And all across Europe, you had a widespread socialist movement. The Second International made a point of not using the word communist to describe themselves because communism had been associated with the violent anarchists and extremists. So they would call themselves socialists or social democrats, and they formed these mass political parties. these mass political parties. Well, as you all know, big Marxist parties were formed, labor unions were formed, different associations were formed. However, they didn't have a revolution. And they had the crisis of Marxism. And eventually you had World War I. And all these parties promised they would never support a war. But they all sold out and they supported World War I. And the Second International dissolved because the countries were at war with each other. And the Germans and the British and the others, they couldn't be in the same international organization if they were at war. So the Second International collapsed as World War I broke out. But there were many more radical socialists like Rosa Luxemburg and Eugene Debs in America and Lenin and the Bolsheviks in Russia who didn't support World War I. They had opposed World War I. And so, because they opposed World War I, they became vehement critics of the war, and they were considered quite radical. And as you know, in the Soviet Union, Russia, you had the Bolshevik Revolution, 1917. The Soviet Union came into existence. And when the Bolsheviks came to power, they announced that they were forming a new international, a third international, that would promote communism. And it would be unlike the Second International that had sold out and supported the war. It would be a new revolutionary international. And just like the Bolsheviks, they'd originally been called the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, had changed their names to the Russian Communist Party. This would be the Communist International. So after the Bolsheviks took power, they set out to form the Communist International, or the Comintern, as it was known. And around the world, many radicals who were inspired by the Bolshevik Revolution and had opposed World War I joined the Communist International and applied to join the Communist International. However, many of them did not understand the Bolsheviks' beliefs and ideas. They simply were attracted to the Bolsheviks because they had had a violent revolution. And they figured, oh, they had a violent revolution. We believe in violent revolution. And so when Lenin established the Communist International, he made 21 points of membership. There were 21 things that parties had to believe in. And he began to urge the parties to move away from ultra-leftism. And the 21 points of the Bolsheviks, you can read them. Lenin's 21 points, they're called. That was the 21 points that a party had to have. 21 beliefs that a party had to have in order to join the Communist International. Wonder if I can find a list. 21 points, the 21 conditions of admission to the Communist International. It's a long list. It is a long list. But I'll quickly. 1, all propaganda and agitation must bear a communist character. 2, every organization must regularly remove reformists and centrists from every position. Every communist organization, every communist organization must put no trust in bourgeois legality. The duty of propagating communist ideas includes special obligation for propaganda in the army, systemic methodological agitation in the countryside. Every party that wishes to belong to the Communist International must unmask the social pacifism and support for World War I. The parties that wish to belong to the Communist International have the obligation of recognizing the necessity of breaking with reformism. There we go. A particularly marked and clear attitude on the question of colonies and oppressed nations. You have to support oppressed nationalities. Every party that wishes to join the Communist International must systemically and persistently develop activities within the trade unions. Every party belonging to the Communist International must wage a stubborn struggle against the Second International, the Amsterdam International. Parties that join the Communist International have an obligation to subject personal composition of parliamentary factions to review and to remove unreliable elements. Parties belonging to the Communist International must practice democratic centrism. Communist parties of the countries must carry out work legally from time to time, undertake purges and re-registration of membership in order to cleanse the party of systemically petty bourgeois elements. Every party that wishes to join the Communist International has a special obligation to give unconditional support to the Soviet Republic against forces of counter-revolution. The parties have an obligation to write a communist program and get rid of the social democratic program. What is this? Individuals have to fight and work. They generally take binding decisions in cases of civil war. They must change their names. They must call themselves the Communist Party. All the leading press and organs of the party have the duty of printing all the official documents of the Communist International. All the parties that belong to the Communist International or have submitted an application for membership have a duty for calling a special Congress as soon as possible. Those parties that wish to enter the Communist International but have not yet radically altered their previous tactics must do so before they can join the International. And those party members who fundamentally reject these conditions and theses laid out by the Communist International must be expelled from the party. Those are the 21 points of admission to the Communist International. And the Communist International was formed. Immediately after it was formed, Lenin wrote his book, Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder, because there were all these ultra-leftist elements who joined them on the basis that they wanted to have a violent revolution. And many of the people who joined the Communist International didn't believe in running candidates for office. They said we need a revolution, not elections. Many of these individuals who joined the Communist International didn't believe in working in trade unions that were not communist. And they said instead that you should only, you should form radical communist-controlled labor unions. Sylvia Pankhurst, who was a very famous suffragist in Britain who became a communist. She was one of the main targets of criticism that Vladimir Lenin criticized. She was an ultra-leftist. She was urging people not to vote. She was opposing a strategic alliance with the Labor Party when the Labor Party was being accused of being funded by Moscow and facing like an all-out attack. And Lenin, he said that she was very articulate. She was an amazing, leader of the British working class, but her line was not correct. And that was the first fight that the Communist International had, was against ultra-leftist elements who didn't believe in joining non-communist labor unions, who didn't believe in joining elections, who didn't understand that sometimes you have to align with reformist elements in order to get things done. That was the first fight in the Communist International. And that was in the early 20s. And that they basically were urging these parties to not just be groups of people who believed in violent revolution, but to actually be real major political parties. And then from there, the Communist International established the concept of the United Front. And the concept of the United Front was that they would try to mobilize working class power, that they would have days of actions around what they called the minimum program, right? That traditionally Marxist parties have what's called the minimum program, which is just basic stuff: free political prisoners, labor union rights, raising wages, shorter hours, just basic things. And then you have the maximum program, which is socialist revolution. And then in a revolutionary crisis, in the middle, you have what is called the transitional program. And these are demands that maybe aren't full revolution, but are demands that escalate the struggle to the point that it could lead to that. You have the minimum program, the maximum program, and the transitional program. And thank you, Gaia. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll write that down. And that was how the Communist International operated, is that they were basically around the minimum program. They wanted to bring the working class movement together. They were anarchists and ultra-left elements. They were social democrats and reformists. And the idea was that the communist parties of the various countries would put forward days of action or demonstration or protests around freeing political prisoners, around raising the minimum wage, around protecting the rights of unions, around the minimum program, and they would try to unify the working class movement around that. And that was the idea, the United Front program, the United Front. And so during the 1920s, the communist parties of the world transitioned away from being ultra-left organizations, and they instead began trying to build united fronts. And in the United States, they formed something called the Trade Union Educational League, the TUEL. They joined the existing labor unions and tried to push them in a more radical direction. In other parts of the world, they did similar kinds of things. In the United States, there were two Italian immigrants, Sacco and Vanzetti, and they were charged with murder. They were framed up for murder. And so the Communist International, the communists, they organized a united front campaign, a huge protest movement to free Sacco and Vanzetti. It was a big protest movement to free Sacco and Vanzetti, these two Italian immigrants who were accused, framed up for murder. What's actually interesting is that that Mussolini, who was the fascist dictator of Italy, he supported Sacco and Vanzetti. Even the fascists of Italy supported Sacco and Vanzetti because they were Italian on the basis of them being Italian. But regardless, they were not successful. Sacco and Vanzetti got the death penalty, but it was a really big case that was widespread, and communists all over the United States and all over the world were protesting to free these two Italian immigrants, Sacco and Vanzetti, who'd been framed for murder. Writing it down. So that was the United Front, right? That was the United Front program. And as you know, Lenin died. Vladimir Lenin died. And before Vladimir Lenin's death, he made a lot of interesting statements. Before Vladimir Lenin's death, he made the famous statement. He said, "Communism is Soviet power plus electrification." And basically what he was saying is we already have Soviet power. We have these workers' councils, these assemblies, this mass movement we've built. But we need to build up the country. We need to industrialize. And so communism is Soviet power plus electrification, meaning that they didn't really have socialism yet because they hadn't industrialized the country. In addition to that, Lenin introduced what he called the new economic policy, which is they reintroduced the market. Small businesses, private ownership, especially in the countryside, small farmers got their land back. You started to have small, middle peasants, or kulaks, they were called. And Lenin said it was a step backwards, but it was necessary in order to increase the living standards in the country, because they'd been blockaded and surrounded. They needed to have the new economic policy, and it was a step away from military communism. Trotsky advocated permanently continuing military communism, but Trotsky was defeated on that question, and they introduced the new economic policy. And then Lenin died. Shortly, a couple of years after the new economic policy, Lenin died. So after Lenin's death, after Lenin died, they then there was a fight in the party between three different factions. The first faction was led by Nikolai Bukharin. And Bukharin, his position was they had to continue the new economic policy permanently because Russia was too poor. They just needed foreign investment. And in order to get foreign investment, they needed to make peace with some of the Western countries. They needed to establish a diplomatic relationship with various governments around the Western world to bring in their foreign companies to invest. That was his position. Trotsky's position was permanent revolution. He wanted to march communism across Europe, continue militarism, and just, make the Soviet Union a military holdout, spread communism across the world. So Stalin was the centrist figure. Originally, Stalin aligned with Bukharin, and they defeated Trotsky. And Trotsky's position of permanent revolution was wildly unpopular in the Bolshevik Party and among the population, because they had just been through World War I, and they'd just been through the Russian Revolution, and millions of people had died, and they needed to raise living standards. And so they just needed to, they couldn't have permanent revolution. What Trotsky wanted to do, was just not going to work. So Trotsky was defeated. Then after that, Bukharin and Stalin began fighting with each other, because Bukharin said that they needed to just continue the new economic policy permanently. Stalin came up with his own theory called socialism in one country. And he says, instead of just continuing the new economic policy, what we need to do is we need to build socialist industries. We need to have a 5-year economic plan. Stalin came up with the concept of a 5-year economic plan to build the country up and rapidly industrialize, because they anticipated a capitalist crisis and an invasion. They basically figured that when the capitalist economy crashed, it would only be a matter of time before the country got invaded, before the capitalists would launch a war to try and save capitalism by destroying the Soviet Union. So Stalin fought with Bukharin, and Bukharin was defeated. And at the 6th World Congress of 1928, Bukharin was defeated. Trotsky had been defeated the year before, 1926, 27. And then at the 6th World Congress, Bukharin was defeated. And that is when the Communist International solidified the line. The line of Stalin became the official line. Throughout the 1920s, the Soviet Union was very confused, and the global communist movement was very confused. And if you read the history of communist parties in the 1920s, they were very confused. In the United States, you had a very booming economy in the 1920s. In Germany, the economy was obviously very, very bad, and the Communist Party was growing, but it was very confusing. It was a very confusing time. In the 1920s, the early years of the communist parties of the world, they didn't quite know what they were doing. They ran one way, they ran another way, they were very confused. But 1928 is when they solidified the line. They solidified the line, and they established the official line. And in 1928, they divided the United Front. They'd had this concept from Lenin of the United Front. Then they argued that there were two types of United Fronts. There was the United Front from above, and that meant you unified with leaders of social democratic political parties. And then there was the United Front from below, which meant you denounced the leaders of the reformist parties, but you mobilized in a way that would recruit the members. So in 1928, the Communist International launched the United Front from below. That was their slogan. And they raised the slogan, class against class, and united front from below. And what that meant was they were no longer going to seek unity with the social democratic leaders, but instead they were going to engage in mass mobilizations of the population to recruit the rank and file of the working class, the united front from below. It was basically out of the movement to the masses. We're not going to waste our time trying to recruit the social democrats and get them to align with us in a coalition. Instead, we're just going to do really militant actions, demanding jobs and housing and education for our population. And we're going to recruit the masses. We're going to go lower and deeper to the real masses. 1928 was the 6th World Congress. Now, at that point, 1928, it was about a year later, you had the stock market crash and the Great Depression began. And the communists positioned themselves as the leaders of the unemployed movements throughout the world. So unemployed people. 1931, they had International Unemployment Day. And almost every city in the Western world, in the United States, in Britain, France, Germany, had huge riots and rebellions of unemployed people led by communists. It was International Unemployment Day. And they built these unemployment councils. And this was what they called the third period. Right? They argued that since the Russian Revolution, there had been two different periods. There had first been the immediate aftermath of the Russian Revolution, where you had an uprising in Germany, you had an uprising in Hungary and elsewhere. But then after that, you had the period of capitalist stabilization, right? Because you had the Roaring 20s, the economy was recovering, etc. But then they argued that starting in 1928 and really starting with the Great Depression, they had entered the third period. And the third period was the period of revolution, the period of capitalist crisis and the rise of socialist industrialization. And so this third period, they argued, was defined by Western capitalism having a great economic collapse and the socialist Soviet Union rapidly industrializing. And it was wild what was happening because the Great Depression, the Western capitalist countries were all deteriorating economically. And the Soviet Union was rapidly rising up out of poverty. If you want to read an interview that'll blow your mind, go and read H.G. Wells' interview with Stalin. I will post the link in the chat because it's from, I believe, it's from 1934, and it's called Marxism versus Liberalism. But H.G. Wells, the very famous science fiction writer, he wrote The Time Machine, he wrote many things. He sat down with Stalin, and they had a big conversation about communism, capitalism, and what it all means. And this will give you a sense of the worldview of the global communist movement at the time. Go and read H.G. Wells' interview with Stalin. And basically, he's saying that we're Yes, War of the Worlds guy interviewed Stalin. You are correct. And it's a fascinating interview. And I would really encourage you to go read it. I just posted the link in the chat. It's a very good interview, and it gives you an understanding of their perspective. In the United States, because the communists were banned from trade unions, they formed their own trade union coalition, the Trade Union Unity League, the TUUL, and they went and organized the unorganized. They didn't try to take over the unions that already existed. Instead, they tried to go organize in the South, where there were no labor unions. They built textile workers unions that organized big strikes in Gastonia, North Carolina. They organized big unions of tenant farmers and others. And the communists were key in building unions among workers who were not unionized. And they also were leading struggles of the unemployed. And that was the third period. And the third period is probably considered to be the most revolutionary period of the Communist International. And that was, in every country, they put forward the line of building a Soviet country. In Britain, they said, we're going to build a Soviet Britain. In the United States, William Z. Foster wrote a book called Build Towards Soviet America, right? And that they would agitate about the need for socialist revolution at every opportunity. And in some ways, their line was a bit ultra left in some ways. They were kind of saying that in every country that they were going to come to power, they were going to copy the Soviet Union. That was not correct. In some places, they were, talking about how they would outlaw every political party except for the Communist Party. And that if you read overall, William Z. Foster's book, Towards Soviet America, is very good. But some of the ideas in there are a little bit ultra left and come across as a little bit heavy-handed and authoritarian. And in a lot of places, the message the Communist Party was putting out is, hey, capitalism is failing and, the Soviet Union's great. We're just going to copy the Soviet Union in our country. And that's not the correct way to frame things up. They learned from this, right? But they were doing the best they could. And the Soviet Union was rapidly industrializing. And the communist parties of the world were growing in big numbers because of that, because the Great Depression was happening. But what happened? Well, you had the rise of Adolf Hitler in Germany. You had the rise of, Mussolini was in power in Italy. And fascism was on the march because in response to the uprising of the working class, you had the rise of fascism. So then, starting in 1935, they had the seventh, in 1935, August of 1935, they had the seventh World Congress of the Communist International. And at the seventh World Congress, the hero was Georgy Dimitrov. Georgy Dimitrov was a Bulgarian guy who Hitler had tried to frame up for burning the Reichstag, right? The Reichstag was the German parliament. The way Hitler took power was that he was in coalition, but then there was a false flag. The Nazis burned down the parliament building and they blamed the communists for it. So it was a false flag, and they used a false flag to arrest the Communist Party. So they arrested this Bulgarian guy, Georgy Dimitrov, and they put him on trial in Germany for having burned the Reichstag. However, Georgy Dimitrov was a brilliant man. He could speak English, he could speak German, he could speak Russian, he could speak Bulgarian. He was a brilliant man. And he basically, he was able to debunk in real time the Nazis' propaganda. He was live on the radio, and he was able to use his wit to basically trip up the prosecutors at his show trial and prove that they had framed him up, that he was not guilty of having burned the Reichstag. And so they deported him back to the Soviet Union. They found him not guilty, and they deported him back to the Soviet Union. And when Dimitrov got back to the Soviet Union, he was an anti-fascist hero. He was considered to be this great hero of communism because he had humiliated the Nazis in their own courts, and there had been this global campaign, Free Dimitrov, and Dimitrov was free. And so in 1935, Dimitrov gave the big speech to the Communist International gathering, the Congress of the Communist International, 1935, the Seventh World Congress. Dimitrov spoke, and he said, we have to change our tactics again. And now what we're going to do is we're going to have a united front against fascism, or a people's front, a popular front. And he said, now we're not only going to align with social democrats and reformists, we're going to even align with capitalists. We're going to be at the center of a fight against fascism, because capitalism in the Western capitalist countries is deteriorating. It's leading toward fascism. But we as the communists are going to position ourselves at the center of the anti-fascist fight. And because of that, we will be able to move toward revolution, because capitalism is naturally leading toward fascism and war. And so we will be the leaders of the people who don't want to move that way, and we'll have to lead them towards socialism. It was a reorientation. Instead of condemning the Social Democrats, calling the Social Democrats social fascists and traitors, now they were building a coalition with the Social Democrats and showing the Social Democrats how to fight fascism. It was a switch in tactics, 1935. And as you saw, late 1930s, the communists built anti-fascist united fronts. They built labor unions, and they did amazing things. And they went to Spain to fight against the fascists in Spain, to fight against Franco. And then World War II broke out. And during the Second World War, there was a feeling that it was not good for the Communist International to exist, because the Communist International hurt the ability of the Soviet Union to have an alliance with the various anti-fascist countries, right? If you have a Communist International in the country, it's like you have a group that wants to overthrow the Communist Party, or overthrow the government. And so they dissolved the Communist International. They dissolved it in 1942. And since after that, there was no Communist International. But I want to read to you, and this is really important, I want to read to you what Mao said about dissolving the Communist International, because this is very important. And I'm going to read to you what Mao said about it. This is 1943. 1943, Mao was asked, why should the Communist International be disbanded? Did it not devote all of its efforts to the emancipation of the working class in the whole world and in the war against fascism? And Mao said, it is true that the Communist International was created by Lenin himself. During its entire existence, it has rendered the greatest services in helping the country to organize a revolutionary workers' party, and contributed enormously to the great cause of the anti-fascist war. Revolutionary movements can neither be exported nor imported, despite the fact that aid was accorded by the Communist International, and the birth and the development of the Communist International resulted from the fact that China had a conscious working class. The working class created its own party, the Chinese Communist Party. And the Chinese Communist Party, although it has only 22 years, has already undertaken great revolutionary movements. It is a principle of Marxism-Leninism that the form of revolutionary organizations must be adapted to the necessities of struggle. If a form of organization is no longer adapted to the necessities of the struggle, then this form of organization must be abolished. At this point, now goes on to say that the international situation in each country, the Communist International, which is far removed from the concrete struggles of each country, was adapted to the relatively simple conditions of the past, when changes took place rather slowly, but it is no longer a suitable instrument. The anti-fascist states are all kinds: socialist, capitalist, colonial, and semi-colonial. Among the fascist states and their vassals, there are also great differences. In addition, there are also neutral countries. For some time, it has been felt that a centralized organization of an international character was not appropriate for organizing rapidly and efficiently the anti-fascists of all the states, and this has become recently obvious. The leading cadres of the communist parties of various countries have already grown up and attained political maturity. These revolutionary movements have been continuous and uninterrupted. In the course of revolutionary movements, the Chinese Communist Party has already acquired its own excellent cadres and rich personal experiences. So basically, and he says, since the Seventh World Congress of the Communist International in 1935, the Communist International has not intervened in the internal affairs of the Chinese Communist Party. And yet the Chinese Communist Party has done its work very, very well. So basically, Mao said it was a good thing that they dissolved the Communist International, because at that point it was not necessary to have one central organization of communists, directing the communists of the whole world. And the fact that communists around the world were perceived of as taking their orders from the Soviet Union, in some cases that was true, that kind of hurt the communist parties. They appeared like puppets of the Soviet Union. So because of that, the Communist International was dissolved. Now, there are international communist organizations that still exist. There's something called the International Conference of Communist and Workers' Parties. That exists. There's also the World Federation of Democratic Youth, which is a global alliance of communist youth groups. They have a festival every 4 years called the World Festival of Youth and Students. I've been to 2 of them. It's an amazing festival. I hope all of you get an opportunity to go to one of them. There's also the Women's International Democratic Federation, and that's an organization of women's organizations that are communist-led, and that's out of the United Nations. There's also something called the World Federation of Trade Unions, and that's a global alliance of trade unions that are led by communists. But there is no more any communist international. That doesn't exist, and it shouldn't exist, and that there are some radicals who feel we do need to form a new communist international. I don't agree with that. The tactics of communists in different countries should be based on their own unique circumstances, and that the needs of communist governments around the world and the needs of communist parties are not the same. That doesn't mean that it is not our duty to defend and support communist countries against Western capitalist imperialism. That's not up for debate, right? Any socialist or anti-imperialist state should always be defended against the imperialists. But the tactics that communists use should not be depending necessarily on what the socialist governments want. For example, the Cubans have long felt that the Democrats are the better party for them. And they may be, right? Obama established diplomatic relations with Cuba. The right-wing Miami Cubans who obsessively hate Cuba, they're Republicans. So the Cuban Communist Party very much feels that if it was up to them, they'd like American communists to support the Democrats. However, North Korea, they very much feel, especially since the age of Donald Trump, that Republicans are the best party, right? And that they supported Donald Trump when he first got elected. And they saw Donald Trump as somebody who, was the first president to ever visit their country, who tried to establish relations, was the first American president to visit North Korea. And so the North Koreans, they were telling people who supported them around the world that they should support the Republicans. At the end of the day, communists in America shouldn't support the Democrats or the Republicans. We should be putting forward a program of our own for socialism. However, we should be making alliances where possible. That communists should not be the puppets of any government. And this is important, right? That at the end of the day, being a communist means that it is your job to build international solidarity and mobilize the working class of your own country to move towards socialism. And that means you do want to support the countries around the world that are under attack, and you do want to build the unity of the people of the world. But that does not mean that what you do and the decisions you make will necessarily, in the long term, benefit or be, what the various countries that are under attack want you to do. And the imperialists like to play favorites, right? I mean, sometimes they'll be friendly to one country while they attack another country. So we don't need another communist international. We do need communists from around the world to speak to each other. But yeah, that's what I wanted to just get out of my system. I wanted you all to understand about the Communist International and the role that it played. I just wanted to kind of quickly go over that history. So thanks, everybody. Those are my opening remarks for tonight. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and I will start calling you all out as I see you. Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. I see Jenny Lynn says fire. All right. Very, very good. Very, very, very good. Anyone else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Phil says truth. All right. All right. Monroy. I'm Monroy too. Jenny in Cincinnati. Chicago. Lawrence Johnson. Richmond. Binghamton, New York. Love Blind Hate. Colin in Greensboro. Temple City, California. Chester in England. Mark in Mission, Texas. Patch in Arizona. Christian in Bergen County, California. San Francisco, St. David's, Bermuda, Molly McGuire in Orange County, Canary Islands, John McCarthy in Chicago, Raj in Dallas, Heidi in Edinburgh, Scotland, Timoshenko in St. Louis, Balthazar in Oakland, Biggie in Portland. Welcome, Biggie. Charles in Zambia. Poncho says I did a great job on the Convo Couch. I thought that was fun. All right. Bob Troy in New York, John Whitty in Houston, Christian in New Jersey, shout out to you, Pittsburgh, dude, Cleveland Pirate Alex, welcome, 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 welcome. Names and locations, I will call folks out as I see you. Names and locations, who is with us tonight? We got Chad in Florida, Oslo, Kabul, welcome, welcome, welcome. Zephyr in Eugene, Oregon. Mariah in North Carolina. But let justice roll like a river, righteousness never a falling stream. Anthony in Detroit, welcome. Anthony. Chad in Florida, welcome, 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 welcome. Awesome, awesome. So glad to have all of you here with us tonight. Wild Times, Far Mook in Seattle, Small Town, Virginia. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Phil in Miami, Florida. Very, very good. All right, I'm going to start answering people's super chat questions. If Huey Newton went on Buckley, that's William F. Buckley, his TV show, why can't we go on Tucker Carlson? Of course. Of course. Why not? Why not go on Tucker Carlson? I think it's great. I think going on that show is awesome. If there's any show I would want to go on, it would be that one, because that's the only show that has the courage to question what the deep state is doing when it comes to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. I'll tell you, folks, I am blown away. Wikipedia has been edited to say that the United States didn't blow up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Seriously. Wikipedia has been edited to say that Seymour Hersh's report about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is false. I am beside myself. Wikipedia makes no effort to be neutral at this point. I mean, it's unbelievable. Unbelievable how rigged Wikipedia is. Because everybody in the world knows the United States blew up the damn pipeline. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that. And for them to, I mean, that's just beyond me. That is just beyond me. And when I see stuff like that, I mean, it's just unbelievable. It's just utterly unbelievable. Nothing wrong with going on Tucker Carlson's show. Nothing wrong with debating a neo-Nazi, going on a neo-Nazi show. It is fine to engage with people with whom you disagree. Now, there's a question of, you want to be strategic. Do you really want to promote people? You want to use your platform strategically to advance the interests of the movement, of the working class, etc. There's nothing wrong with talking to someone who you disagree with, engaging with someone. And at this point, I'm just telling you, the forces that have started out around Trump are probably the forces that could give birth to a real socialist movement in America. And I wrote a whole book explaining why that is. And no, Trump is not a socialist. And no, the MAGA movement is not a socialist movement. It's bad in many ways. But if you read my book, you'll understand what I'm getting at. The process of revolution, it starts in different ways. Economic crisis leading to political crisis, fights among the ruling class, coalitions, etc. Read my book. All right, next question. Has a libertarian ever explained coherently how the free market will prevent monopolies? And this is a question from Christian in New Jersey. And look, libertarians will often say there would be no monopolies if it wasn't for the government. And it's beyond me how they can say this. And I've heard it from libertarians over and over again. There would be no monopolies if it wasn't for the government. The market naturally leads to monopolies. They have all kinds of laws to make sure. For example, right? One common practice was really common back in the early days of this country is that if a factory owner owned a factory or a coal miner, coal mining company, they would go to the middle of nowhere and set up a coal mine, and then they would have a mining town that would be set up. They wouldn't pay you in money. They would pay you in script that was only usable at the company's store. Why did they do that? To maintain a monopoly. And that was really common in mining towns in Colorado and in Pennsylvania. You would work at a mine, and they would not pay you in money. And railroad companies did this too. They would pay you in script, it was called. It would be a piece of paper that you could only spend at the company store. Why did they do that? In order to maintain a monopoly. And then they could charge you whatever they wanted because your money was only good in one place. Well, they've passed laws to prevent that. To prevent that kind of monopoly. There's a law, it is illegal for a Hollywood studio to own movie theaters. Why? Because they would only show their own movies. Movie theaters select what movies they show. And if they own a studio, it's competing with other studios. Why would they show other? So they have an antitrust law that makes it illegal for a movie theater owner to own a Hollywood studio or vice versa. There's all kinds of laws. I used to work in insurance, and in insurance, there's all kinds of laws to make sure that you can't sell if an insurance company is tied with another company, it can't buy insurance from them, because if they did, they would only buy insurance from their own company. It is in the capitalist's interest to have a monopoly. So capitalists will work very, very hard to have a monopoly. And when you have a monopoly, that wrecks the economy, because you have what's called monopolistic stagnation, which means there's no competition, which means that the prices get really, really high, the service decreases in quality, and monopolies are bad for the market. And so the government, at the request of capitalists, in order to keep the economy going, has many different mechanisms in place for preventing monopolies. Antitrust laws are the prime example, but there's many other stipulations that they've gotten, like you have to pay people in money. You can't pay them in script. There's many other things like this that have been invented by the capitalists themselves to prevent monopolies, because when monopolies happen, the whole economy tanks pretty quickly. It's a bad situation. Monopolies are bad for the economy. It's good for the monopolists for a while, but even they lose out pretty soon. It's bad for everybody in the long term. And so the capitalists themselves have worked very, very hard to prevent monopolization. So this idea that the market doesn't naturally create monopolies, I don't know where these libertarians get this idea. And it's like it never occurs to them that the market naturally creates monopolies, because that's what everyone understands, right? Keynes understood this. Adam Smith understood. Everyone understood that there had to be mechanisms in place to prevent monopolies. Everybody understood this, but the Austrian school lives in this magical world where the market is just magical and it just solves all problems. And it's like copyright law, for example. That's a law, that's government regulation done in order to ensure competition. If not, if you have a new idea, the bigger company will just copy your idea and make money off of it, right? Copyright law exists so that if you have an idea, somebody else can't steal it and you can start your new company based on your idea. Like, there's many, many different things that have been invented to prevent monopolization, because monopolization is bad for the capitalist economy. But monopolization is the natural direction of the capitalist economy, left to its own devices. Karl Marx called this the general law of capitalist accumulation, and that the capitalists usually beg the government to step in and prevent monopolization. And it's beyond me. Libertarians have this delusion that somehow monopolies only occur because of the government. They just say it. They just say things because it's true, because they read it in a Ludwig von Mises book, and it's beyond me how they can think that. Monopolies are the natural result. Think about Thomas Jefferson and his theory of the yeoman. Right? He said, I want America to be a great country where we just have independent small farmers who work their own land. Well, you might have that for a generation or so, but pretty soon there's going to be a drought, and some people's crops are going to fail, and some people's crops are going to grow. And the people whose crops grow, they're going to stay in business. And the people whose crops don't grow, their farms are going to go under. And pretty soon the people who work at those farms that go under, they're going to have to become the employees of the people who do. The DOJ calling a Chinese driver's license a secret police station. Okay. We can talk about. All right, I can talk about that. So there you go. There you go. All right. This person says, as a Baha'i member, I have nothing against the Christianities, but I would like to live in a Christian country. How would I fit in? Well, Mark, I don't know. I don't know enough about Baha'ism. I do know that in Iran, the Iranian government believes that Baha'ism is an Israeli conspiracy, and they're very open about that. And that I believe, if I'm not mistaken, one of the holy sites of Baha'ism is in Israel, and that Israel does a lot to facilitate the Baha'i faith practitioners, and that's why the Iranians believe that. And because of that, because of the Baha'i faith, you know, because of that, you know, the Baha'i faith is heavily restricted in Iran. They're not allowed to recruit. You know, other faiths are allowed to promote their faith, but Baha'ism is considered to be like a form of atheism or something. So it's much more restricted than Christianity or Judaism is. You know, and that Baha'ism is heavily regulated in Iran. I know that. But look, Mark, we're not talking about Iran right now. I'm not in Iran. I don't advocate an Islamic Republic for America. And when you said, how would you fit into a Christian country? Well, you already are in one. I mean, I am in favor of the separation of church and state, Mark. I do not believe we should have a theocracy. The separation of church and state is an essential part of the United States of America. You can't have a state religion in the United States because we are way too religious for that. I was actually talking to Joe T. Brar, of all people. We had a conversation about this because it's rather ironic. In Britain, they have a state religion. Did you know this? In Britain, the state religion is the Church of England. And everyone goes to public school and they learn that that's the state religion. And government institutions are all facilitated by the British state. And despite having a state religion, in Britain, most people are not religious. Religion is not a really big part of public life. They have a state religion, but no one really cares about it and whatever, right? And if you don't have that religion, you're free to practice other faiths. But it's understood that the British government officially has one religion, the Church of England. And that's that. What's weird is the United States, we don't have a state religion, but religion is way bigger part of the culture. And you'd think, well, that's weird, right? A country with a secular government is more religious than a country without one, but it actually makes sense if you look at the origin. Why does the United States have no state religion? Why is it that the First Amendment, the very First Amendment of the Constitution begins, the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution begins, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion? Why? The very First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, the first line of the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. Why? Because the Constitution was written to bring the 13 colonies together. There were 13 British colonies in the United States. They declared their independence. They won the revolution, but it took a while before, they could merge into one country. 9 of the 13 colonies had state religions. Massachusetts was Puritan. They practiced the Puritan religion. I believe it was the Congregational Church was the state church of Massachusetts. And Quakerism, the Society of Friends, that was the Church of Pennsylvania. That was what they practiced. Maryland, they practiced Catholicism. And it was a big problem. Getting all of the different states to come together under one government was something that many of the states were very nervous about because these colonies had been set up by religious minorities. The Puritans had set up Massachusetts because the Church of England was oppressing them and telling them they couldn't have their Puritan faith. So they'd come all the way across the Atlantic and set up a colony to have the Church of England, or to have their religion. So the idea of merging with a bunch of other colonies, it made them afraid they would lose their religious freedom. Rhode Island. I forget, who was the guy who started Rhode Island? What was his name? I'm going to Google that. The guy who started Rhode Island, founder of Rhode Island. What was his name? Founder of Rhode Island, right? If I'm not mistaken, the founder of Rhode Island, Roger Williams, right? He was a Puritan who had a theological disagreement with the Puritans or whatever in Massachusetts. So he got booted out of Massachusetts. So he started Rhode Island. Roger Williams, he started his own group so he could have his religion. So when they came to him and said, all right, we're going to merge all into, he said, no, I'm not going to do that. all of these colonies had been formed by religious groups that, to some degree or other, had felt persecuted. And so telling them that we're going to have a central government, they all said, wait a second, we have to have an agreement that this central government does not have an official religion. Because if not, right, all the other state, Roger Williams is afraid that, that all the other states will team up on him and impose their religion, right? Maryland was Roman Catholic. There was a fear, a very big fear, that the United States being majority Protestant, they would team up on Maryland and force Maryland to accept a Protestant government. The Quakers, a very persecuted religious minority, they considered to be, they're considered to be, what do you call them? Apostates by most Christians at that time, at least, because they believed in the voice within, the light within, that you have your own light within. They don't have crosses in their churches. They have meetings instead of prayers or whatever. Well, there was a feeling, the Quakers said, oh no, we've been driven out of everywhere. If we are to form some kind of, national government, our right will be taken away. So the USA's Constitution had the First Amendment to it, saying that there will be no established religion in order to protect religious minorities. And that is a big part of American culture. Nobody is nicer to religious minorities than the American government is. And honestly, maybe we're a little bit over the top with it. Okay? In some cases, I think we're a little too nice to religious minorities. But for the most part, the United States is a great place to be a religious minority. Now, since 9/11, it hasn't been so good to be a Muslim. There's been, obviously a history of persecution of Jews. Atheists don't get treated very nicely in some areas. A lot of, the town I grew up in, people think you're a bad person if you're an atheist. But comparatively speaking, right, in terms of the law and how your rights are treated under law, the United States is a pretty damn good place to be a religious minority. If you believe that it is your religious practice to handle poisonous snakes in the United States, you can do it. There are 2 states, like Kentucky and West Virginia, where people who handle poisonous, deadly snakes, they do it. And we say, you know what? You can't do it unless you're 18, because kids, obviously aren't ready to make that kind of decision. But you know what? If you want to hold poisonous, deadly snakes, that's your right. Homeschooling. Since the 1970s, we've had homeschooling, where if you feel that because of your religious beliefs, you don't want your children to go to American public schools or even to private schools, you can homeschool your kids and give them religious curriculum, teach them according to your own beliefs. No other Western country does that. Almost every Western country says you got to send your kid to school. It can be a private school you pay for. It can be a public school that we go to. You're sending your kids to school. In America, we've said, you know what? If you are so religious that you want to make sure your kids, you have absolute control over what kind of teaching they get, you can homeschool them. That's huge, right? Amish, right? Raising kids without electricity, without heat, without running water. United States, you can do that. Go to Pennsylvania, go to Ohio, where I grew up. They have special schools for the Amish kids with no lights in them, no flushing toilets. That is just a part of our culture in the United States. So, Mark, I would never want to tamper with that, especially now that we have so many other new religious minorities. There used to be very few Muslims in America. Now we have Muslims. We have Jews in America. We have Buddhists. So Mark, I would never want to get rid of the separation of church and state, because that is a unique part of American culture, because we can't be like Britain. In Britain, they can do state religion because no one cares. It's not a very religious society. It's very secular. Very few people are religious. People that are very religious are a small minority within the country. Most people in Britain are very secularized. Some people are atheists, and some people have a vague notion that God is real, or something like that. But religion is just not part of public life. So having a state religion there is no big deal. But in America, where we are fanatical about religion, Americans are obsessed with religion. right? We are. I mean, we are obsessive about religion in America, right? We have got, we've got tent revival preachers, and we got, turn your TV on and see how many religious stations there are. We got snake handling legal, we got Amish people, there's no way that we could ever have a state religion in America, because we wouldn't be able to agree on it. When you have a state religion, that means the government is saying this is the right religion. That could never happen in America. That would be like, we'd have a civil war before that would happen. Okay. We got Mormons. We got, it would never happen for the American federal government to get up and say, this is the right religion, believe in this. That would never happen, because the country would come apart. There would be a civil war over that. Okay. So Mark, when I say we're a Christian nation, we are, in the sense that Christianity is the belief that kind of underlies so much of public discourse. Christmas is a national holiday. Jesus is considered to be a good thing. There's kind of underlying a lot of the language that we use. If you say someone's saying something is good, they're saying it's a land of milk and honey. If someone is not being listened to, they're a voice crying out in the wilderness. Christianity is kind of the what do you call it? It is setting the discourse in America. But that's not the government isn't making it that way. It just kind of happens that way because there's a very big Christian majority and a big Christian history in this country. So you're living in a Christian nation, but you're living in a Christian nation that has a secular government, and I want to keep it that way. So I hope that you're not confused, Mark, about when I say we live in a Christian nation. We do, but it's a Christian nation with a secular government. And I would prefer that it stay that way. But when I say that Christianity is going to be a big part of American socialism, I think that is true as well. The socialist movement that will emerge in the United States is probably going to have a very religious undertone to it, because it's going to be a liberal, and illiberalism in America, is religion, right? I mean, there's no secular illiberalism in America. So the socialist movement that will arise is going to have a very big Christian component to it. Tulsi Gabbard's not a Christian, right? She's a Hindu, right? She's from a Hindu sect, one of the breakaways from the Hare Krishna movement. But Mark, I do not believe in getting rid of the separation of church and state. I am for the separation of church and state. All right. Any thoughts on Kit Clarenberg's article saying 9/11 hijackers were CIA recruits? So we already know about the 9/11 hijackers and their extensive ties in with the Saudi government and the Saudi embassies and all of that. That was in the 28 pages. Now we know about their ties to the American government. And it's like, shouldn't this be front page news? Weren't we sold a load of crap after 9/11? Remember, it was all Saddam Hussein. Oh, Saddam Hussein did it, even though he's a secular Arab national. I mean, so much has come out now. And why is it that, asking the questions they call 9/11 truth is off limits in the United States? I mean, at this point, we have the 28 pages showing Saudi Arabia's extensive involvement. Now we have this report from Kit Clarenberg. I think we should be allowed to talk about 9/11 truth. But of course, just like Wikipedia says, we're not even allowed to have Nord Stream 2 truth. So discourse is very, very controlled in this country. There you go. Now, Gaia says, as a Russian, I feel nervous commenting on Russia-Ukraine policy at all, and I hope the McCarthyism will die down. And I agree with you. I mean, it's scary at this point. The threats on freedom of speech are so out of control. And, it is our duty. It is our duty to stay strong and hold the line during this nightmare. And hopefully it'll die down, because the American people are weary of this already. So I'm with you, Gaia. It's very scary time. I'm sure it must be even scarier to be of Russian heritage. I just work at a Russian company and have a pro-Russian, anti-imperialist political view, and I'm scared. So imagine how scary it must be to actually be from Russia. These are scary times, absolutely. And we hope it will die down. And we got to stand with the Uhuru movement, because, who's going to be there for us? Who's going to be there for us if they come for us, right? It is our duty We have to stand with the Uhuru movement. Tell your friends about it. Tell your neighbors about it. If you're at a college campus, put up posters everywhere. Put up posters everywhere about the Uhuru movement. Raise awareness about what's happening. Don't let them get away with this. Don't let them get away with it. Is Maoist third worldism just Trotskyism in reverse? I can see what you're saying. Trotskyism says the West is all that matters. You have to spread communism to the Western capitalist countries. Maoism, third worldism says, oh, the West never can have a revolution. Only third world countries can have it. So I can see what you're getting at there. But at the end of the day, they're both Trotskyist in a sense that they are deviations. They're not saying to go and organize the broad masses of people. Trotskyism never sinks its roots into the masses of people. It is always a middle class movement of intellectuals that pushes intellectuals away from the socialist countries, gives them a way to be against capitalism, but also against the socialist countries. And Maoist third worldism it's an excuse for people to not be involved in the struggle and to just see themselves as superior. So yeah, I can see that. But it's both of them are an excuse not to do what Lenin said and go lower and deeper to the real masses. Department of Justice calling a Chinese driver's license center a secret police station. Oh, RFK Jr. Bernie Sanders 2.0. Yeah, look, they've been running this for a while. This isn't the first time this has happened. They've claimed that there are Americans who are operating as agents of the Chinese police in the United States. And I don't know all the specifics of the case, but, some of what's alleged, I feel like, is not a crime, right? It's basically they allege that there's Americans who are living here. Some of them are Chinese Americans. Some of them are just regular Americans who get paid by the Chinese police to track down individuals who have fled China, have been convicted of crimes in China and fled the country, and harass them, and call up their relatives and put pressure on them, try to get them to turn themselves in. That's what's alleged. Now, it's not illegal to send messages to people. It's not illegal to cancel people on the internet or send people messages. It is illegal to violently intimidate people. It is illegal to engage in threats. And I think I don't know the legality of this, but I think, carrying out the operations of a foreign law enforcement agency without the permission of the domestic law enforcement agency is politically shady. Okay. I'll just be honest with you. I don't know exactly what these people did or are accused of doing. But there's questions there. Now, that said, the notion that there's all these secret police stations of China all over the country, that's ridiculous. Is it possible that there were some individuals in New York City? I mean, this is all I know. I just know what I'm seeing. That individuals in New York City who were getting paid by the Chinese police to harass people convicted of crimes in China living in New York City. Is that possible? Sure. And is that illegal? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. The fact that they're using it to whip up anti-China hysteria, that's obviously insane. And if these people, all they did was exercise free speech, then, they should be allowed to exercise their free speech. Now, if they did other things, if there were threats of violence, if they broke into these people's property or something like that, obviously that's not legal. But if these people were simply engaging in freedom of speech, and they happened to do it, somebody who was helping them to do it was a Chinese police officer or something. I mean, I just don't know the law. I'm not a lawyer. I would never act in such a way. I'll just tell you that much. I want nothing to do with any law enforcement agency. I think when I was in high school, they had you go to the career center for one day to see if you wanted to go there. And so I went to the criminal justice program at the career center. And even that training was just weird. I would never want to have anything to do with law enforcement. I don't know if that's legal or not. Obviously it is illegal to, if you're not the police of America, you can't go around arresting people. If you're not the police of the United States, you can't go around coming into people's homes, So I don't know. Honestly, I don't know what's going on there, but it's part of the anti-Chinese hysteria because it's true. let's be real. The NYPD, New York City Police Department, has an office in Israel. Did you know that? They have an office in every single state of the United States and in Israel. So, and that you can be sure there's French police stations or French police operatives over here. There's German police operatives over here. There's probably Mexican police who were hanging out over here, tracking down drug cartels and stuff. Foreign policing agencies operating in the United States with the permission of the American government is not something we should be surprised about. And covert police activities by different countries probably go on, not just countries that are, at odds with the United States, like China, but countries that are probably friendly to us. There's probably a good chance there's Canadian cops in America doing stuff they haven't told the American government about. That's possible. And, policing agencies do covert activities. That's true, right? They do. Policing agencies engage in covert activities. In fact, there was a case where there was the New York Times revealed that there was a Port Authority police officer who went to Afghanistan to infiltrate a terrorist group. And he's supposed to be guarding the ports of New York City, right? He's supposed to be guarding the Port Authority of New York City. But instead, he's like in Afghanistan infiltrating terrorist groups. So weird shit happens. And policing agencies are known for doing covert activities. So, I think the idea that this is hysteria, it's like, okay, how about the fact, maybe the story here is that the USA is coddling and granting asylum to all kinds of convicted Chinese criminals. That might be more of a story there. Just saying, the U.S. government is furious that Assata Shakur is in Cuba. There's a few other Black Panthers who live in Cuba. But what about the fact that there's, apparently lots and lots of Chinese convicted criminals living in the United States? That's kind of a news story. I want to know who they are. They would probably tell us all of them have just been persecuted. They're all just victims of the communist regime. But how many of them are just criminals? Right? There was that one guy who was a Trump guy. It was, Gao or whatever his name was. And he was just a fraudster. And they got him he's now been charged with doing fraud over here. Right? Looks like he was just a fraudster. And because he aligned himself with Trump and Steve Bannon, now they caught him for some of the fraud over here. So there you go. There you go. The world of policing agencies are a lot like intelligence agencies. The FBI is considered an intelligence agency. It's officially a policing agency, but because it polices at the federal level, intelligence is one of its main activities. So, you're entering a murky world there, a very, very murky world. Let me just put it that way. You're entering a murky world where you have no idea what's going on. All right. Is RFK Bernie Sanders 2.0? He's way better than Bernie Sanders. The stuff he's saying about foreign policy, the stuff he's saying about big pharma. Oh, he's far better than Bernie Sanders. He makes Bernie Sanders look like a moderate, but he's giving voice to real sentiments that are beneath the surface. And they will delegitimize him and they will marginalize him to some degree, but it's going to be harder because of his last name and because of who his uncle was. And I think having him enter the race as he did is awesome. I think it's absolutely awesome. And the Democrats, they're going to marginalize him. He probably will get less play than Bernie got, but they're going to look really bad while they do it. And they're going to have to give him more play than they would give any other third candidate saying third party or not third party candidate, any other candidate who says what he says, right? They're going to have to treat him with some level of legitimacy, and that infuriates the Democrats. I think it's a great move. I am really, really excited that he's running. Bobby, go, Bobby, go. Go, Bobby, go. I'm really glad. And I hope he shakes up the Democratic Party establishment. This is great. I think it's tremendous. And I hope that he shakes up the Democratic Party establishment, and I'm excited about it. Look how they pulled the fire alarm during his campaign. That's probably just the beginning of the dirty tricks we're going to see. All right, folks. Sorry if it seems like I rushed through this tonight. I'm a little bit tired, and I've got a lot on my mind. But let's all do everything we can to raise awareness about the Uhuru movement. And we'll be in touch. I'm going to put on the closing music. I think I'll be back. Probably probably tomorrow night. If not, I'll be back soon. In the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. All right, everybody. Thank you.